A lone cowboy rode the empty trail at dusk, the sky turning copper as the wind carried a strange silence across the land. And that was when he saw an Apache woman sitting beside a broken wagon, holding her injured arm, trying to stay strong even as pain colored her eyes. He hesitated, knowing the land was filled with tensions and warnings. Yet something inside him refused to ride past her. So he climbed down, fixed the wagon with steady hands, bandaged her wound with gentle care, and watched her leave without expecting even a single word of thanks, believing he had simply done the right thing. But when night fell, his uneasy heart sensed danger creeping through the quiet darkness, and at sunrise he woke to the thunder of hooves shaking the earth, stepped outside, and froze as he saw his cabin completely surrounded by Apache, warriors painted for war. The wild frontier stretched endlessly under a pale morning sun, a place where silence carried both beauty and danger. And on this rugged land lived a cowboy who kept mostly to himself inside a small wooden cabin standing at the very edge of Apache territory. Each dawn he woke to the sound of distant winds and the soft creak of old boards, living a quiet life shaped by caution, watching every horizon because he knew one mistake could invite trouble he could never outrun. And though he rarely crossed paths with settlers, he often heard their stories, fearful whispers about rising tensions with the Apache tribe, stolen horses, missing travelers, and sudden fights sparked by long-held grudges. Still, he tried to stay neutral, surviving day by day with his rifle, his horse, and a hope for peace, never imagining that a single choice on an ordinary evening would soon pull him directly into the heart of danger. The cowboy stepped off his porch with the same steady calm he carried every morning, unaware that fate had already begun weaving a path he could not escape. And as he saddled his horse and rode toward the open trail, the cold air brushed against his skin with an uneasy edge that he tried to ignore, guiding his horse along a narrow path cut between cliffs and dry brush where shadows clung to every corner. And the silence felt heavier than usual, almost as if the land itself was holding its breath while he moved deeper into the wilderness, until the stillness suddenly broke when he heard a faint cry carried by the wind, a sound so fragile that it made him pull the reins and listen again. And when the cry came once more, filled with pain and quiet fear, he followed it around a rocky bend and found an Apache woman sitting beside a wagon that leaned sharply to one side, its wheel cracked and half-buried in dust, while she tried to keep her injured leg from trembling beneath her. And for a moment he stayed on his horse, knowing that crossing into a stranger's trouble, especially so close to tribal lines, could bring consequences he could not control. Yet the sight of her struggling alone pierced through every warning in his mind, pushing him to dismount and approach with slow, careful steps, keeping his hands visible so she would not feel threatened. And though she watched him with guarded eyes, she did not move away when he knelt beside the broken wheel and inspected the damage, realizing the wagon would not last another mile unless he helped. So he set aside his hesitation and began repairing it with calm precision, tightening each piece with practiced strength, while the woman tried to straighten her posture and hide the pain that tightened her jaw. And he offered her a water flask with a gentle motion that surprised her enough to accept it without a word, letting the cool water ease the exhaustion that had settled on her face, while he worked through dust and heat until the wagon finally stood balanced again. And when he turned to help her stand, she hesitated only briefly before placing her hand on his arm, allowing him to lift her with steady care. And their eyes met for a brief second that carried both gratitude and unspoken tension, born from decades of conflict neither of them chose, yet both were forced to live within. And after she climbed into the wagon, she gave him a single nod, small, controlled, but filled with meaning, before guiding her horse forward without looking back, leaving him alone on the trail with dust settling around his boots and a strange heaviness lingering in his chest, though he told himself it was nothing, just another moment on another day, unaware that the simple choice he made to stop, kneel, and help a stranger had already sent a message across the plains, a message that would reach warriors long before dawn and place him on the edge of a danger far greater than he imagined. As the cowboy rode back toward his cabin, a strange chill settled over the land, not from the evening air but from a quiet tension he could not explain. And though the sun dipped behind the hills in soft orange light, something in the silence felt off, as if the trail itself was watching him with hidden eyes that waited for night to fall. So when he reached his porch and tied his horse, he paused for a moment, listening to the faint rustle of dry grass carried by the wind, trying to shake the uneasy feeling that clung to his thoughts, then stepped inside and lit a single lantern that cast long shadows across the wooden walls. Yet even the warm glow could not push away the sense that the world outside had shifted since the moment he helped the woman. And while he tried to prepare a simple meal, every small sound around the cabin made him turn his head, from the distant cry of a hawk to the hollow creak of aging boards beneath his boots, until he finally set the food aside and walked to the window, staring into the growing darkness where shapes blended with night and open land stretched endlessly without mercy. And as he stood there, he felt a pressure in his chest, a quiet warning born from instinct sharpened by years of solitude, urging him to stay alert. So he checked his rifle and placed it within reach before stepping onto the porch once more, watching the horizon fade into a deep blue void that swallowed the last tracers of daylight. And when he heard a faint thump far out on the plain, he held his breath, waiting for another sound, but only silence returned, heavier than before, pressing against him like a weight he could not push away. So he went back inside and sat near the lantern, trying to calm his thoughts, though his mind kept drifting to the woman's guarded eyes and the way she had struggled to hide her pain. And he wondered if she had reached her destination safely or if someone had seen them on the trail. But he forced himself to stop thinking, knowing the night would only grow darker if he let fear take hold. So he lay down on his bed, yet sleep refused to come, slipping away each time he closed his eyes, replaced by images of distant riders moving through shadows. And long after the lantern burned low, the cabin felt as though it stood on the edge of something waiting to break, until a deep rumble of distant drums echoed across the land, soft but unmistakable, rising and fading like breath from another world, sending a cold shiver down his spine as he sat up sharply, listening with absolute stillness while the sound drifted through the night, leaving behind a silence even more unsettling than noise. And as he gripped the edge of his bed, he finally understood that whatever had begun on the trail was far from over, and the darkness outside his walls was no longer just night, it was a warning. At dawn, the cowboy sensed the change before he opened his eyes, a deep vibration trembling through the ground like something powerful moving across the plains. And as he pushed himself upright, the faint glow of morning barely touched the cabin walls. Yet the strange rumble grew clearer with each passing second until it formed a steady rhythm that tightened his breath. So he rose from the bed, gripped his boots, and walked toward the door with silent steps, feeling his heartbeat match the distant thunder outside. And when he pulled the wooden latch and stepped onto the porch, the sight that met him froze every thought in his mind. For the open land surrounding his home was filled with Apache riders forming a perfect circle, their horses standing firm, their faces marked with bold, war-painted lines that caught the rising sun with an eerie glow, and their eyes, sharp and steady, remained locked on him as if measuring every move he made, while the air between them felt charged with a force he could almost taste, a heavy mix of anger, judgment, and something deeper he could not read. And his hand instinctively moved near the doorframe where his rifle hung. But he stopped himself, knowing any hint of fear or aggression would only spark something he could not control. So he stood still, letting the cold morning wind brush against his face as he tried to steady his breathing. And in that tense silence he noticed a taller rider near the front, perched on a dark horse with the posture of a leader, his expression unreadable beneath painted marks that traced the lines of his hardened features. And the chief lifted one hand slowly, signaling the others to remain alert as he guided his horse a step forward, bringing an unsettling quiet over the entire circle. And the cowboy felt every muscle tighten as the chief's gaze settled on him, with a depth that seemed to pierce straight through his chest, revealing nothing, yet demanding everything. And before he could find any words to speak, the riders began tapping their spears against their saddles, a slow, unified rhythm that echoed through the morning air like a heartbeat of approaching judgment, sending a chill crawling down his spine. Then the rhythm stopped at once, replaced by a long silence that made the horse beneath the chief paw at the ground, as if sensing the tension burning between the two sides. And just as the cowboy wondered if this was the final moment before something irreversible happened, a rider from the back of the circle began moving forward, parting the line with careful, controlled movements, and he recognized her instantly. The same Apache woman he had helped on the trail her poster upright, her expression calm but heavy with meaning, and the sight of her brought a sudden wave of confusion, hope, and fear all at once. as if the truth behind their arrival hung in the air and waited to be spoken. The Apache woman guided her horse forward until she reached the open space between the chief and the cowboy, and the moment she stopped, the circle of riders shifted with a quiet tension, their eyes following her every move as if the truth of the entire morning rested on her next breath, while the cowboy stood motionless, trying to understand why the woman he had helped now stood among warriors who looked ready to decide his fate without mercy. And she turned her gaze toward him with a calm strength that carried both gratitude and weight, then spoke a few soft words in her language, each syllable sharp, steady, and filled with meaning he could not understand. Yet the chief listened with absolute focus, his expression tightening slightly as she continued, until she finished with a tone that felt final. And the chief slowly raised his hand toward a rider holding a staff adorned with feathers and carved symbols, who stepped forward to translate in a deep voice that broke the heavy silence, saying that the woman belonged to a respected family of their tribe and had been missing through the previous night after her. Wagon broke on the distant trail, causing riders to search for her with growing fear. 4 tracks showed another horse near her wagon, leading them to believe someone from the settlements had harmed her. And that belief, the translator said, brought the warriors to the cabin at dawn, prepared to deliver justice without hesitation. But the woman then spoke again, her voice steady as she pointed toward the cowboy and explained that he had not harmed her, that he had helped her without expecting anything, repaired her wagon, eased her pain, and left without threat or demand. And the chief's stern expression shifted slightly, not soft, but changed by the weight of her words, while the cowboy felt a quiet rush of relief, mixed with the cold shock of realizing how close he had come to death without even knowing it. And the translator continued, saying she told them he showed respect in a place where resentment usually lived, that he treated her with kindness, at a time when fear controlled most encounters between their people. And as the chief listened, he slowly dismounted and walked forward, each step deliberate, grounding the moment with an authority that made even the horses stand still. And when he stopped in front of the cowboy, the tension thickened once more, for the entire circle watched as if a single gesture from the chief could alter everything. And after a long silence, the chief placed his hand over his own heart, then extended that hand toward the cowboy, a gesture of acknowledgement, not friendship, but respect earned through actions rather than words. And the woman lowered her head slightly as if marking the truth officially spoken, while the riders eased their grips on their weapons, the sharp threat in the air dissolving into a heavy but peaceful calm. And in that fragile silence, the cowboy understood that the danger had passed, not because he fought or pleaded, but because someone he barely knew had chosen to speak the truth when it mattered most. The cowboy stood completely still as the chief's hand lingered in the air for a breath that felt longer than the entire morning. And when he finally reached forward and accepted the gesture, a quiet shift passed through the circle of riders, a movement so subtle yet powerful that even the horses responded with a calm exhale, as if the entire plain recognized the moment of changed intention. And the chief stepped back with slow, deliberate confidence before raising his chin toward the woman, who nodded once and guided her horse closer to the cowboy, her eyes holding a depth that carried gratitude, apology, and something unspoken that lay between two people on opposite sides of a fragile boundary. And she reached into a small leather pouch tied to her saddle, pulling out a hand-woven token marked with thin strands of dyed thread shaped into a symbol known only within her tribe, then extended it to him with steady hands, offering not a simple gift, but a sign of honor given only to those who showed rare sincerity. And when he accepted it, the riders around them eased the tension in their bodies, shifting upright in their saddles with a quiet dignity that made the air feel lighter, though the weight of the moment still held its solemn power. And the chief lifted his staff, drawing a circle in the air that signaled the warriors to lower their weapons, each movement controlled and cautious, as if respect itself required discipline. And the cowboy watched them, unsure how to respond except with silent acknowledgement, because words felt too small for what was unfolding before him. And the woman spoke again in her language, her tone softer than before, causing the translator to step forward and explain that she thanked him for doing what many would not, for offering help without fear or expectation, and that her people did not forget acts of sincerity even in times of conflict. And the cowboy felt the emotion of the moment settle deep in his chest, not because he sought recognition, but because the truth of the encounter revealed how small choices carried consequences far beyond his understanding. And as the chief mounted his horse again, he gave one final look toward the cabin, assessing it not as a threat but as a place belonging to a man who had earned cautious regard, then tapped his heels lightly against the horse's sides, guiding it into a slow circle that the other riders mirrored, moving with coordinated precision that turned the tense formation into a measured retreat, their hooves thudding softly against the earth as they began to move away. And before the woman followed them, she held the cowboy's gaze once more, letting the silence between them speak the remaining truth, that survival on this land depended not only on strength but on compassion, even when compassion carried risk. And with a last quiet nod, she guided her horse back into the formation, leaving him standing alone with the woven token resting in his palm, its threads warm from her touch, its meaning heavier than any word spoken that morning. And as the riders drifted toward the horizon, the land finally exhaled, leaving behind a silence, filled not with fear, but with an unexpected sense of respect. The cowboy watched the riders fade into the morning light until they became nothing more than shifting figures on the distant plain, leaving behind a silence that felt deeper than anything he had known. And as he stood there, holding the woven token, he realized how close his life had come to ending with the rising sun. Yet instead he had been given a moment that changed the way he saw the land, its people, and even himself. And he breathed slowly, letting the weight of the encounter settle in his heart, like a quiet reminder that one act of kindness could echo far beyond the moment it was given, carrying consequences no one could predict. And when he finally turned toward his cabin, the world felt different. Not safer, not gentler, but clearer, shaped by a single truth he would never forget. That courage was not always found in a gun or a stance, but in choosing to help even when danger waited unseen.